Wait a minute. What's this stuff? That little furry rodent named Phil, he lied to us. I thought spring was supposed to be here early this year. Well, I guess we gotta go deal with it. So let's go. No mice in here like there was this morning. So those 5 bags ought to last us 3 to 4 weeks for our layer hens. We choose to buy our feed by the bag for them, mainly because if we went the bulk way, I don't feel we would go through it fast enough and it'd probably spoil, especially if we were to put it in a gravity wagon. So yeah, it might be a little bit more expensive and not as cost effective to buy it by the bag, but it's actually cheaper for us to buy it from our local feed mill than it is any of the big box stores. And we know it's ground fresh. It's not been sitting on a shelf for months and months. So that's the way we do it for our lady friends here on the farm. So now that we got some of our outside chores done, I think it's time to go in the shop and work in there where it's a little bit warmer. So the last time we were in the shop, we worked on the Farmall H project. We got the rear main transmission housing all painted, along with the clutch housing and rear axle housings. I got the rear transmission housing mounted here on a makeshift wooden stand. I wanted to use some steel, but I didn't have any extra scrap steel laying around to build a stand out of, and I sure wasn't about to go spend the money on new steel to do this job with the price of steel these days. So I used what I had laying around. So I think it'll work fine to do the job. So we got a few bearings that came in. These are both input transmission bearings. The larger one goes on the input shaft. It's the inner bearing. So we got to press this old one off of here and check the diameters, make sure it's correct. The other bearing is for the main shaft. Supports the end of the main shaft inside the input shaft assembly. Goes on the end of the main shaft like that. We're going to check and make sure that fits right. One thing I did notice immediately is the difference between the two bearings in the width of the bearing. The old bearing is probably about half as narrow as the new bearing is. So I wanted to make sure that the new bearing would fit inside this race, and it looks like it will. And one thing I am gonna like already is being a wider footprint. It's gonna spread the load better, and it's actually gonna wear better inside here. So that fits inside there nice, feels good in there, so I'm really happy with that. I was gonna replace this shaft. You can get them through Steiner Bates Corporation, but the problem is they're rather expensive. And you know, I figured with the little bit of wear that was in there, I could take some emery paper and shine it up and clean it up. So that's probably what we'll do there. So I got the shaft all cleaned up with emery paper where the new bearing is going to ride. So we're going to press that down on there. Probably going to need a little bit of help. I'll use a rubber mallet, hit that with a regular hammer. We're down as far as it'll go. So now we gotta see, looks like everything will be all right. I was wondering with the thicker bearing if the bolt and all that was gonna fit all right, and it looks like it will. I gotta tighten this bolt up here, give it a little tension on here. I didn't put any Loctite on that bolt. Wasn't any on it from the factory, so I figured it must be all right. Didn't need any. So that bearing spins over freely. We'll test fit it. Man, that feels good now. Nice and smooth like it ought to be. So the main shaft should be done, ready to go in. So now I got the main input shaft and the vise here. I got a new bearing for it. Before I go just taking the bearing off, because I'm probably going to end up destroying it, getting it off of here, I want to make as many checks as possible to make sure I got the right bearing before I just go destroying it. So I got a caliper here that I measured the outside diameter of the outer race, and then I'm going to compare that to the new one, and that feels good. Now I can't get the caliper down in here to measure the width of the bearing, but best I can do is kind of eyeball it, and it looks pretty good there. Nearest I can tell, that looks like the right bearing, so we're going to work on getting this bearing off of here. I don't have a cheese cutter to get in underneath it, or a puller for it, so I'm probably going to end up getting a torch out and cut the outer race off, get all the balls out of there, get down to the inner race, and then sever the inner race as well with the torch, and we'll go from there. There, I got the outer race all cut off. Now that gets me down to the inner race. There. Now we can flip this over. Run this all the way until both jaws of the vise actually contact the inner race of the bearing. So that way when you're driving down on it, you're driving down on the inner race and not the outer race and the balls on the bearing. You don't want to damage them. There. So now I got the housing for the input shaft assembly here. This is all cleaned up, painted, but we're ready to put this back together. And that slides right down on there like that. See if we can't get this bearing to, I'll use an overgrown socket here to seat this bearing. So with this outer bearing assembly, you have this outer bearing retainer. Now there is something to note on the main housing here. There is a drain hole for oil that has made its way through this bearing up against the seal. There is a groove cut in the back side of this bearing retainer that has to mate up with that, and what that allows is the oil that is on the back side of here to drain back into the transmission housing. So that's a key piece of information to know when putting this thing back together, to make sure you have those lined up, so that way the oil can get back. There's a seal that goes on here. There's a key that goes in this groove here, and then this is your input coupling assembly. Has a groove cut in it as well. This all clean up, and this is your sealing surface here for the inner part of the seal. And that will go down on here, and that completes your input shaft assembly. This bolts to the face of the transmission housing. Again, with this, there's a drain hole here that when this cavity fills up with oil, can drain back to the transmission housing as well. So that has to get oriented correctly when we put it back together. Well, now that we got some parts ready for the transmission, we're going to start filling up this transmission housing and starting to make this thing look like a tractor again. But I think this is where we're going to end the video. One point of information, February 23rd or 24th, this upcoming Friday or Saturday, is the New York State Farm Expo in Syracuse, New York. We're planning on attending, not sure which day yet. A lot of it depends on the weather around here. Lake effect snow, you never know. So we're gonna try to pick the best travel day. So I will put in the community section on our YouTube page as to what day we're gonna be there. And if you happen to see us, feel free to come up and say hello. So with that, I hope you have a great day and we'll see you next time.